Every professional has a unique magic waiting to be discovered. At Finding the Unicorn in You helps you unlock your hidden potential. Thank you for tuning in. Now switching it over to our host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Finding the Unicorn in You. Today's guest is a pioneering change management expert whose transformative journey began in 1967 when he first challenged Syracuse University racist Native American mascot. With decades of experience driving change at personal, organizational, and societal levels, he now coaches individuals and groups, bringing a sophisticated understanding of the psychology and neuroscience of transformation. His lifelong commitment to meaningful change has positioned him as a unique voice in helping people and organizations navigate complex evolutionary processes. So now, without further ado, welcome Brian Gorman. Hey, Brian.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Of course, I'm excited to have you here. And an impressive bio. There's so much to dive deep into this. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what led you to this journey?
So I think it's impressive because I'm in my more senior years. I turned 75 in December.
Congrats.
I was in Syracuse University in 1967-68 was my freshman year. I was an introverted Eagle Scout, and I committed to myself that I went to the university, I was going to change how I showed up in the world. So I did what any introverted Eagle Scout would do. I joined a fraternity. I joined Alpha Phi Omega, which is the national service fraternity, and volunteered to do youth work on the nearby Onondaga Reservation. The university mascot at the time was called the Saltine Warrior, and the Saltine Warrior was portrayed at athletic events by Caucasian fraternity brothers dressed up like Hollywood Indians and running around like they were drunk. I protested. I tried to convince the university to change their mascot or to start giving scholarships to Native Americans to portray the mascot more honestly for 4 years, and I failed. But the spark in me about seeing things that needed to be changed and committing myself to making that change happen has been with me ever since. So throughout my career, the common thread has been change. Throughout my personal life, the common thread has been changed. I actually came out in the summer of 1981, which was also the year that what was then known as the gay-related immune deficiency, now known as AIDS, surfaced. I became very active in the whole AIDS movement. I was very active in the gay rights movement. That's just a part of my DNA.
Yeah. Wow. And you went through a lot because that era was really dark for for history, especially for LGBTQ. Like, how was it being able to not only coming out during that same time frame, but just that whole experience for you?
It was very educational. It was very real. It was one of the many important lessons that I want to share with others, which is you can shutter yourself from what's happening, or you can be a part of making something happen.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us, even today, and what's going on today in the world, we tend to take a step back because we say, well, that doesn't really affect me right now. But by saying that, we are adding to the problem because we're waiting until it does affect us. And if we are privileged enough to not get affected, that's when we really have to step in, because you're walking in with a lot more privilege than the other individuals who are being attacked or being discriminated against. So we have to be able to stand up and do something about it and go for it.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, back then, I can only imagine, because you didn't have the same supports. Like, you didn't have the same organizations and the same type of, I want to say, privileges that we have today. So I can only imagine how more difficult it was.
Yeah, one of the interesting, just a brief story, I was in Minneapolis at the time. And shortly after I came out, I joined the board of an organization called North Star Publishing. And we were at that time, again, counter, because we published a gay and lesbian newspaper. And at that time, the gay and lesbian populations were worlds apart. We had this wonderful editor named Susan Dennelsbeck, and Susan would scour, and we didn't have internet, so she scoured print. And when the paper would come out, I would bring copies of it to doctors' offices because we were digging up information around GRID at the time, and then later in the year and so forth, AIDS, that wasn't even appearing in medical journals.
And that's impressive just because that's the era before Google. So you had to literally go and interview people and talk and then gather the information, bring it back. And then I can only imagine the deadlines you had, because like a lot of these things had to be printed the next day or by certain deadlines. So wow, it's very impressive.
Thank you.
And it's amazing that you did that. And a lot of that ended up bringing up a lot and inspiring other people to do the things that we do today. And I think those little micro actions every single day end up reaping a lot of seed, like planting a lot of seeds in people and thoughts that inspired the new generations.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing a lot of transformation that you've gone personally through your life. And now you went from that to now transforming others. And I know your title is a transformation and Maverick Coach, which I do want to dive in a little bit deeper with that, because Maverick, you don't really hear that very often. So tell us the story behind that.
Probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, I was talking with another coach, and I've pretty much gone out on my own again after 4 years last fall. And I'm looking to rebuild my work stream, my client base. And I was talking to Kimberly, and she said, "So what is your niche?" And I said, "I'm a leadership coach." She said, "Yeah, you and about 837,000 other coaches. You need to be a little more specific than that." So I started thinking about it, and I started writing down, what are the characteristics of the clients that I most love to coach? The clients who I feel make the biggest difference in the world, and I help them get to a point of making even more of a difference. And I took the list, and I had a meeting with my friend ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and I said, these are the characteristics of the clients I love most to coach. Give me 6 options for what you would call my niche. And one came back, Maverick. And as my story and as you've shared and I've shared, I tend to be a maverick myself. And those are the clients that I most love to coach. Ones who are saying, this is where we are, it's not where we're going to stay.
Yeah. And I've just looked up the definition because I needed to. So for those listeners that don't know what Maverick is, it's an unorthodox or independent-minded person. So it's, in a sense, I would even label that as a unicorn, a person that's different, a person that is not afraid to go against the grain like yourself.
Exactly.
What a beautiful definition. And I think it's like very empowering too, just to call yourself a Maverick coach, because it shows that you are willing to go different ways than the normal, just to be able to help people transform and get to where they want to be.
Yep.
I like that. I like that a lot. So you've been coaching for a while, and then I know you've been in this practice. How has it been for you working with people and helping them through their journey?
I've been doing the journey thing pretty much since 1967, 68. A little known fact about me, the first career I had was I was drafted out of grad school in 1972. I spent 4 years in the Army as a drill sergeant, or I'm sorry, in the Air Force as a drill sergeant. And so every 6 weeks, I would get 48 disparate individuals And my job was to turn them into a functioning organization. And at that point, I had graduated with my undergraduate degree. I had started working on my master's. I was not your typical drill sergeant. But what I have come to learn over the years is whether I'm working with one client or whether I'm working with a global organization. And you mentioned I have a long history in organizational change management. Organizations don't change, people do. And so it's what's really interesting that I've learned is it's the same change journey. And every one of our change journeys is the same change journey.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell, who was a mythologist and psychologist in the mid 20th century, among his research was, is there a common thread through creation myths across cultures and across times? Is there a common thread in coming of age myths across cultures and across times and so forth? And what he discovered is that there's one path through all myth. And he called it the hero's journey. And what he said is, while we approach each change as if it's unique and individual, while we approach each change as if it's unique, it's not. We take the same change journey over and over again. And I now have more than 50 years of experiencing that journey, studying that journey, knowing how to navigate that journey. And whether it is a career change, whether it is my oldest client decided at the age of 72, after 48 years of marriage, he was going to break down the wall between who he was and how he was living his life and come out. That's the same change journey as the banker who decides they want to be a Broadway actor.
So what are the commonalities that you see in this hero journey? What are the template, I guess you would say?
So the template is, and for those of you who have never heard of the hero's journey, if you've read a really good fiction book, if you're into the Star Wars movies or any good movie or theater like Wicked, they all follow the path of the hero's journey. As I lead my clients through it, I bring a lot of neuroscience to the work. It begins with a story, because our brains are story processors. They are not logic processors. They're not little computers. They're not supercomputers. We had story before we had language. And so it begins with a story, but it's not a story about because that's up in our head. A little more neuroscience. We have the same motor and sensory neurons and electrochemical activity in our hearts as we do in our heads. We have about as many neurons in our guts as a cat's brain. The heart is the seat of passion, compassion, and values. The gut is the seat of courage, self-protection, and who we are at our core. So make this a story that is all you. I did this. Give you an example. A client who in the middle of the housing crisis decided that she and her husband were going to retire and move to Costa Rica. Their story could have been, we're going to have to sell 2 houses because second marriage, they both had their own homes before. We're going to have to sell 2 houses in the middle of the housing crisis. We're going to have to learn Spanish. We're going to have to get rid of all of our property. We're going to have to figure out how we relate to our kids when we're that far away. Maybe we'll move to Florida. That's the logic. The story was, we did this. We woke up this morning in our own home on the coast of Costa Rica. The ocean air is blowing through the windows. We can hear the chatter of Spanish in the streets. We had to sell 2 houses in the middle, but it's a different story. And that story actually builds new neural networks. Your subconscious knows what it's like to achieve that change that you want to make. So when you run into the inevitable obstacles, it knows there has to be a way over, under, around, or through, because it knows what it's like on the other side. That's the important starting point. Then we move into preparation, not planning, because we can only plan for what's in our conscious again. So preparation is about bringing different things into our conscious that we need to hold on to, we need to get better at, we need to let go of, or are going to be our constraints in this journey, and so forth. As we do that, now we can begin the planning and the moving forward. And when it's all over, we're a different person.
And a little bit, like in a sense, it's changing the narrative from being the victim of your story and being the hero of your story. Because I feel a lot of us, for example, like just me taking it very personal on my end. Last year, I had a bad experience with an organization. I separated and I was unemployed. I had the choice of saying, boohoo me, I'm unemployed. I don't have any means of making income. This is the end for me. And I just have to like feel pity for me and then drown in this hole, right? Instead, I decided to view it, like you said, in a different perspective where, wow, I have so much opportunity now because I have free time. I'm not tied down by an employer. Why not take this as a chance to take a leap of faith in myself and like really pursue my business and see if I can make this happen? And a year later, here I am.
Exactly. I often will share the story. When I was a child, my paternal grandparents taught me how to play pinochle. And when I would get a bad hand, I would be that 8 or 9 or 10-year-old grump. And my grandfather, and I don't know whether he intended this to be a life lesson, but here I am carrying it 60 some years later. It's not up to you, the hand you're dealt. It's always up to you how to play it.
That's true. You can't control the tools that you were giving at birth or the tools that you were given growing up. Some people are going to have more, some people are going to have less. But you have to make the best of what you have, and you have to be creative and be willing to think outside of the box.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how sometimes we are given the same tools, and then you see some people using it in innovative ways that you could never imagine that led them to be able to succeed a little bit better. And it's just really asking for help, networking, and being open to try new things in different ways.
I think all of those are important lessons. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. And not easy ones to learn. I think sometimes we're so set in our ways and it's hard to be open to those things. And a lot of those things can be very scary. So, with the clients that you work with, let's say that what is one of the most common issues that you like tend to see people when they're trying to go through this journey?
There are a couple of things that I think pop up more frequently than others. One is that old shiny object thing. I've seen companies sink themselves chasing shiny objects while they're trying to become something that they have every ability to become.
Mhm.
I've seen people do the same things. Let me paint the bigger picture here. One of the most common challenges people encounter is the stories they tell themselves. Going back to what you were saying, I'm not smart enough. I don't deserve. I can't. I'm too old. I'm too young. All of those are stories. And our brains process stories as if they're truth. And so that's how we live our lives. And they're all stories. You can change the story. And if you change the story, you change your unconscious filters, you change your life. And so I will often be coaching clients on changing their stories.
I love that. And it's hard to rewrite our story sometimes, especially if we're so tied to it. Like I've had clients who end up leaving services because they just don't believe in themselves. I had one client that literally closed out in December, like of this past year, because she said, I just don't see what you mean. I don't think I can be a leader. I don't think I have what it takes to grow in the organization. I think I'm just stuck in my way. Like I'm stuck in this position and I don't think I can ever be good enough to be there. And I tried to reword it in different ways, but it was just that story was so ingrained in her. It was difficult. And I ended up telling her, you know what? I just don't think this is the right time for you to do this.
Yeah. And you were doing exactly what you should have as a coach. I was fortunate enough, I trained Damien Goldvarg. Damien is a two-time past president of the ICF board of directors. And one of the messages he really drove home for us is you have to stand in your client's greatness even before they know what it is.
Mm.
And whether you're a coach, whether you're a frontline supervisor, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, I think that same lesson applies. If you are going to do everything you can for the success of another, you have to stand in their greatness and help them see and achieve it.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that people need to learn is that most things can be achieved. It's just not going to be easy. And sometimes you have to, there's this story that I constantly go back to where it's this old man and his apprentice, and he is trying to learn from the guy, but every time that the mentor keeps telling something new to the guy, he keeps saying, no, this is not the way I learn. This is not how I do things. That doesn't make sense. So it was objection after objection. And the apprentice felt that they knew everything. So he brought up a cup of tea and he filled it up to the brim of the cup and gave it to him. And he basically had another empty cup. And he said, if you have, which cup can get more tea in the cup? And he's the empty one. And he's, what happens if I start pouring tea into the full cup? And he starts pouring, it just starts dripping out. Nothing really, it doesn't retain anything because it's already full. He's like, exactly. So you need to empty everything that you know in order to have a new perspective and be able to absorb the new things. So you have to be willing to be open-minded and really learn from new things. So you have to let go of the old and like the narratives and the stories that you told yourself in order to be open to the new one.
Back in 2013, I think it was, we had Superstorm Sandy here on the East Coast. I live right on the Hudson River. The city I live in butts the Hudson River. It has inlets at the north and south end, and I think our average elevation is about 7 feet above sea level. We flooded. I could not get out of the building for 2 days. When I could, I started walking around and looking at the damage. The north end of Hoboken is an inlet from the Hudson River where people anchor sailboats. And as I was walking up along the river, there was a sailboat sitting on the sidewalk, still tied to its buoy, which was still connected to its anchor, but it was probably a half a mile from where it had been before the storm. When I got up to the inlet, there were some sailboats bouncing around like nothing happened. There were some that had disappeared, and there were some whose masts were sticking out of the water. We all have anchors in our lives. The stories we tell ourselves are one of set of those anchors. It may be people, it may be religious or spiritual beliefs. It may be, I have an ex who, one of the reasons we're in X is his Porsche Boxster was an anchor for him. That was part of his identity. I haven't owned a car since 1980. When we want to change, the anchors in our lives tend to be unconscious. They tend to be below the surface, just like the anchors that we use out in the water. If you really want to change, you have to look at your anchors. Which ones do I have to let go of? I have to let go of these 2 houses that we own if we're going to move. Which ones do we have to change? We have to change how we relate to our kids. Which ones do we need that we don't have now? We need to learn Spanish if we're going to live in Costa Rica. All of those changes are possible. I have a good friend who, in her signature, has a quote from Captain Jean-Luc Picard. It says, "Everything is impossible until it's not."
I love that a lot. And what insightful things, like lessons that you've just mentioned there. And I want to unpack that so much, but we're already running out of time. So I do want to like loop back into the last question, which is the unicorn question, which is what unicorn lesson have you learned in your life that has impacted you the most and made you the person that you are today?
The part of our form of self-protection. Don't let it prevent you from becoming the person you are.
That is, yeah, I think a lot of us don't and end up like not doing things because we're so afraid that we're gonna fail. But failure is part of life. Like we're gonna get embarrassed, we're gonna feel shame, we're gonna fail, but you only truly what I tell all my clients is you really truly fail when you stop trying.
Absolutely. It's the old, it's not how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get up.
Exactly. And through each time that you fall, you learn something new about yourself. You learn a new technique. You learn how you react during certain failures. And all of this is good information for you to be able, it may not help you in the moment, but it may help you along your path in the future. There's so many things that I've tried and failed at that later in life, other people ask me like, oh, I want to do this. I'm going to try this route. And I'm like, oh, actually, why don't you try this other route? Because I tried that route and this is what usually ends up happening. You're more than welcome to try, but if you don't have to, don't repeat the same mistake I did. And then they're like, oh, thanks for the advice. And they try the other thing and they end up going a lot further than I ever did in that journey. So I feel that through every failure, we learn something and we can then share that with other people.
Absolutely.
This has been such an amazing conversation, Brian. Thank you so much for being on here. And if somebody wants to hire you as a coach or wants to talk to you or ask you a question, how can they get in touch with you?
My website is transforminglives.coach. My email is Brian, BRIAN, at transforminglives.coach. And on my website, there is a link to schedule time to talk. Always open to a conversation. You can also find me on LinkedIn and we can connect and schedule something through there. And if you're interested in coaching, I always provide a complimentary session, what it's like to work with me. And each of us can decide whether or not this is the best fit for you.
I love that. And for listeners, don't feel like you have to jot all this down. If you scroll down on the show notes, you'll have all the links there. And if you go to my website at rainbowcareercoaching.com, go to the Unicorn Wall of Fame, you'll see Brian on there with his picture and a blog where you'll have a summary of what we talked about today, along with all the quotes and links. Last but not least, as a reminder to everyone, please share, comment, and review. Leave us a 5-star review so that this content can keep touching other people's lives and people can keep sharing this great advice I was giving here today. And episodes come out every Friday at 7 a.m. Thank you, Brian, for everything. Any last words before we wrap up?
I just want to thank you so much for this opportunity.
Of course, and thank you for being on here. And until next time, everyone.